Wired.com presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here is your host, David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 350 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. Today on the show, we'll be discussing the science fiction comedy series Future Man on Hulu. And this will involve spoilers for the entire first season, so just be aware of that. And I'm joined by three guests. So first up, we've got Anthony Ha, making his 11th appearance on the show. He covers media, advertising, and pop culture for the news site TechCrunch, where he also hosts the podcast Original Content. A chapbook of his short stories called Love Songs for Monsters was published by Youth in Decline in 2014, and he has a story forthcoming in Lady Churchill's Rosebud Wristlet. So Anthony, welcome to the show.
I'm excited to be back.
Then next up, we've got Andrea Kail, making her 6th appearance on the show. She's a graduate of the Odyssey Writers Workshop, and her short fiction appears in the Writers of the Future anthology, Fantasy Magazine, and Lightspeed. She's also a television writer and producer, was the script supervisor for Late Night with Conan O'Brien, and is the creator of the wildly popular Twitter feed Unhealthy Affirmations, Wisdom and Inspiration Reinterpreted for the Clinically Depressed. So, Andrea, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That will never not be funny, just saying.
It gets more popular every time I mention it.
Yeah.
And also joining us today is Tom Gerencer, making his 4th appearance on the show. His short fiction appears in magazines such as Realms of Fantasy, and in books such as New Voices in Science Fiction and I, Alien. His short story, All Our Donkeys Were in Vain, appears in the new anthology The Best of Galaxy's Edge 2015 to 2017. So, Tom, welcome to the show.
I'm glad to be back.
Okay, so let's start with Anthony. So, Anthony, had you ever heard of this show, Future Man, before I emailed you about it, and what sort of expectations did you have going into it?
I had heard of it, but I think it was coming out at roughly the same time Hulu released The Runaways, which was a Marvel show. So I think that kind of distracted me, and most of my attention for around that time kind of went to The Runaways. I kind of forgot about Future Man. I was like vaguely aware that it had been renewed, so I had some sense that it must have been done okay. But other than that, I just knew it was like a funny science fiction show with Josh Hutcherson. And I mean, I have to say this is pretty different from what I was expecting.
Well, I'd say who is Josh Hutcherson for listeners?
He is I think a child star who I think some of the reasons why he's famous I'm not 100% clear on, but then he was in the Hunger Games.
Yeah, he was PETA in the Hunger Games.
Right. I think he did some stuff before that, so I think he kind of came into the Hunger Games, but yeah, that's the main reason I guess people will know him.
Right, and so I was sort of aware, like you, when it came out, and I kind of looked at the cover, but nobody was talking about it, and the cover it gave me the idea that it would be sort of dumb, I guess. I was imagining it would be sort of like a dumber version of Futurama, I guess, where some modern character would get transported into the future, and he would interact with different weird futuristic societies every episode or something. That's sort of what I was imagining.
Kind of like Quantum Leap. That's sort of what I thought, maybe.
Yeah. And so I never watched it, but then they've been advertising on Facebook hardcore for season 2, which started recently. And I don't know if it's just because of the stuff that I like that they're targeting me specifically, but it was like every time I logged into Facebook, I would see tons of ads for Future Man season 2. And that made me just kind of curious because I'm like, oh, if they're spending this kind of money promoting it, maybe, yeah, like you said, maybe season 1 did all right, or maybe, they believe in the show or something. So that's kind of what got me to check it out. So, Andrea, had you heard of the show at all?
I had not until you sent me that email. Hadn't heard of it at all. Totally new to me.
Yeah. And you know that Seth Rogen is an executive producer? Did you know that?
I do know that now.
You mean now that I just told you?
Now that I've watched the show, I did see the credits.
Uh-huh.
I'm the read the credits kind of person.
Yeah. Are you? What do you think of Seth Rogen?
I like Seth Rogen. I think he's funny.
Mm-hmm.
I've no other opinion of him, up or down. Why am I supposed to?
I don't know. I mean, well, you're a comedy professional, so I would.
Oh.
I would figure you're like hanging out at his pad or something.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, every weekend smoking bongs and yeah, that. Best buds.
No, I mean, I liked Superbad, which I think he did. I'm not 100% sure of that. And
he co-wrote it. He and Evan Goldberg wrote it together, I think.
Okay, yeah, I liked that. And there's a bunch of things he's done that I haven't watched, but yeah, I liked that quite a bit, and so I've liked him as an actor and stuff I've seen him in. But yeah, I'm not hugely familiar with him. But how about Tom? What do you think? Did you have any expectations going into this show?
Zero. I'd never heard of it, and when you asked me to watch it, I was just like, oh, I have no idea what this is, and I'd never seen an ad for it, anything like that. So no, complete blank slate.
Yeah, how about do you have any opinions on Seth Rogen?
Yeah, I really like him. I watched a bunch of his comedies, Pineapple Express being one that pops into my head right now, and I don't remember what names for others, but I probably watched like 6 or 7 comedies he was in, and I always thought he was kind of funny. And then I watched this one, I can't remember the name of it, but it was in the past like 5 or 6 years. It was about the end of the world. There was like an apocalypse going on. It was him and James Franco. Is that ringing a bell with anybody?
This is the end, is what it's called, I
This is
think.
the end. This is the end. And gained so much respect for him when I watched that, because the whole movie was just basically like taking pot shots at basically him and his friends, like the Hollywood, like young Hollywood comedy guys, just like taking complete pot shots at them. And I thought anybody who can do that is super brave. So I really liked him after I saw that movie.
I think he also wrote the movie 50-50, which was I really enjoyed, about I can't remember what's his name is the lead, but Seth Rogen's like the best friend, and he's helping his friend who's just been diagnosed with cancer, and it's really funny and touching. Just saying, putting that out there.
Wow.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that. I haven't seen This Is the End. I remember seeing a trailer for it. I thought it looks pretty good, but then I think it got pretty hostile reviews, or maybe someone that watched it.
I'm not shocked that it got hostile reviews, because it wasn't at all like a mainstream type of movie, and it wasn't like, the plot wasn't great, but just the premise was basically, look, here's me and James Franco playing ourselves, and Jonah Hill playing himself, and basically every like young comedy person from that generation you can think of, like all playing themselves and saying like, look, people think we're like, we're awesome because we're famous, but really if you put us in a situation where we had to like do something real, we're just a bunch of selfish jerks. Like, that's kind of the comment of the movie, which I mean, I don't know if I agree with that. I don't think that anybody could possibly make a movie and make that comment if they really are a selfish jerk. But I just thought it was like extremely brave for him to be like, look, we're all a bunch of selfish jerks, and especially me and James Franco, who are making this movie. I just thought it was such a neat. My jaw was like hanging open the whole movie. Like, how can they be doing this to themselves? They're just completely ripping themselves to shreds. It was a lot of fun.
Well, right, and if anyone's not familiar with the style of humor, which probably everyone is, but it's sort of like a very kind of like gross, sort of bro kind of. I don't know how else to put it, but sort of like somewhat immature, like a little bit smart, but kind of edgy.
That pretty much sums it up.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we should warn people that there is a certain level of grossness to this Future Man show, like with a lot of the other things we've mentioned. So if you don't like that style of humor, you're not gonna like this show, I don't think.
Yeah, there's a lot of body humor. And just dumb stuff. In a good way, mostly.
Yeah, I really liked I won't get too far ahead, but I would agree with that if you if you're not into, there's a lot of really crude stuff here. If you're not into that at all, just don't watch it, because you're not going to like it.
Right. So how I would pitch the show is basically, I would say it's Back to the Future meets There's Something About Mary. And there's something about Mary is not, it's the Farrelly brothers, so it's not the same like group of people, but to me this show Future Man feels more like There's Something About Mary, because it's less the humor to me of Superbad or something like that, and more the humor of, you have this really nice, genuine, sensitive guy, and everything he does goes horribly wrong, and he's just constantly like humiliated over and over again. So it's sort of that kind of style of humor in a Back to the Future style science fiction story.
Yeah.
I think that's the major source of humor, though there's definitely a lot of there's other kinds of character humor and other kinds of like horrible things happening to other people too.
Yeah, it's not just the main character. Lots of horrible things happen to other people as well.
Everybody has something horrible happen to them.
Right. But so let's say, so the premise of the show is that there's this character Josh, and he's, I think, in his early 20s and lives with his parents and works as a janitor at a clinic that's doing research on sexually transmitted diseases. And
specifically herpes. It's all about the herpes.
Right. Specifically herpes.
Yeah.
And he sort of is a dreamer and, wishes that something, bigger would happen in his life. And he spends all his time playing this first-person shooter called the Biotic Wars, where he's the super soldier in the future fighting, sort of monsters, sort of humanoid monsters. And he's the best person at this game that no one has ever beaten in the entire world. And as the episode opens, he finally beats it for the first time. And two of the characters from the game, Tiger and Wolf, who are these sort of post-apocalyptic soldiers, appear in his bedroom in real life and tell him that the game is real and that it's a recruiting tool to find the savior of humanity, and that's him. And this involves bodily fluids, as Tom was alluding to. So Tom, do you want to? I don't know if you want to talk about that or not, but.
Gee, thanks, Dave.
Yes, Tom, please explain.
You have nobody to blame but yourself.
I when I watched this show, I was like, this show is going to be so much fun to talk about. And I really enjoyed it. And then I remembered that I'm a regular contributor to Scouting Magazine and Boys Life Magazine. and I thought, oh darn. Oh gosh, oh golly. This is going to be really hard to talk about.
Is that your way of saying you're not answering this question?
No, I'll answer the question. I'm just going to do it in a scientific nerd voice. No, that scene was hilarious, and it the thing started out. I had the kind of like bad Futurama idea too at the beginning, because the first scene was like this dream sequence where he thinks he's a hero and then he's really not, and I was like, okay, this is really standard. And then when the two people from the video game show up, I was like, oh, maybe it's not standard, because he's in the middle of maybe I better. This is going to be really hard.
You can do a tag team thing, Tom, if you need to.
Do you want me to say it? He's pleasuring
please.
Himself.
Oh, there you go. That's a PC way of saying it. Thank you. He's pleasuring himself, and he's not just pleasuring himself. He's pleasuring himself thinking about his favorite character in the game, who's named Tiger, and he's really getting into it. And then all of a sudden, she shows up along with Wolf, her partner, right in his bedroom, and he opens his eyes and he goes, "Oh no!" and finishes off basically all over Wolf's leg, and Wolf proceeds to exclaim, loudly about that. And I mean, it was I'm butchering it, but it was a hilarious scene. I mean, I was. At that moment, I was like, okay, nothing standard about this show at all. This show is completely going off the walls, like original, super fun, but definitely gross and bodily fluids and everything.
Although I think what really works about that scene for me is the fact that when it happens, Wolf is angry, but he's not shocked. He's just like, oh, this stupid fucking thing is happening. But it's not like, oh, like I'd never imagined that this could happen.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and so I enjoyed the scene. I wasn't totally sold on the humor of the show at that point. It took me a little bit longer, but like the part where it's a little bit farther on, but the point where this character Josh, she says to Wolf, like, Wolf mentioned something about how Josh like came on his leg, and Josh is like, all right, look, if this is going to be a whole thing that you're not going to be able to get over, just go ahead, come on my leg. And at that point, I was like, oh my God, this show is pretty funny. But yeah, and so these characters. Well, so Andrea, tell us more about these characters, Wolf and Tiger.
they're very stereotypical video game fighters who are now stuck in our world and have to figure out how we live. So they're just constantly beating things up, throwing things across the room. The whole obsession with the baby. They don't have babies. They're sterile in the future. And then Tiger becomes obsessed with babies. And it's, I think right off the bat, I knew it was going to be funny, but then it just went off in a whole other direction that I don't think I've seen anything this funny in a long, long time, to be honest with you. I thought these characters, I thought these characters were hilarious. My favorite part, especially in the beginning, was every time they would get into a fight with anybody, they would yell out what was the names of the moves they would use.
Yeah, the fighting moves.
Yeah, the fighting moves, and they had it in this video game voice too. So it was just
that was classic, because it wasn't just that they were doing that, but it was that Josh, like in his nerd, like I play video games all the time life, was really into that. Like, he just would play these video games and they'd be like, body shot, head shot. And he'd just be like playing along, loving it. And then they start doing it in real life and he's like horrified. He's like, you can't do that. And they're like, why? We do it all the time.
Yeah, so we get this idea that Tiger and Wolf are from, as I said, this sort of post-apocalyptic future, and they live in the sewers and eat rats, and they have no like social skills or like they have no concept of what the world of 2017, the present, Josh's present, is like. Anthony, is there anything else you want to say about these characters of Tiger and Wolf?
No, I mean, I think you guys were mentioning that in some ways there's sort of these stereotypical like video game post-apocalyptic characters, and that's kind of how they start out, but I think they're actually developed in really interesting ways. I mean, it's still in this very kind of cartoonish, over-the-top way, but there's like this commitment to the idea that they're really, really, really bad at living in the 21st century in like a pre-apocalypse world. And then they also like start developing this idea, without getting too far ahead, about like the Wolf character and about, his interest in cooking and his hopes for a life outside, that I thought was all really interesting.
Yeah, let's not get too far ahead, but let me mention too about Tiger. I think that because there are, in science fiction kind of movies, there are a lot of sort of attractive women who are totally badasses and fighters, and a lot of times you don't believe it. And the actress playing Tiger, Eliza Coupe, she really sells that she's like a tough, take no nonsense, take no prisoners person. I mean, she's totally believable in that role.
Yeah, they both do. They both sell it in such a wonderfully over the top way that every time they open their mouths, I just started laughing.
Right. So I mean, I thought like the first episode pretty much we're talking about here was totally hilarious. I pretty much loved everything in it. But my main problem with the show is basically the whole premise. And maybe you guys can like tell me if there's something I'm missing here, but I don't understand why, like how these people from this world where like they're living in sewers and eating rats and they have no electricity and stuff, how they made a game and sent it back through time, and why they thought that would be a good way to recruit somebody to be their savior, and why they even needed a fighter, because they have a time machine and they're not going to have to fight anyone particularly in order to accomplish their mission. And maybe that's getting a little ahead. But then also, just why are they surprised when he can't fight? Does that just make no sense? Because my impression is just none of that makes any sense at all. But maybe somebody thinks it makes more sense than I'm giving it credit for.
I didn't care. It's so funny. It's like, that's the premise. It's ridiculous. The whole show is ridiculous. So just go with it. I mean, they do throw a couple of things in there about how they use the game as training for their warriors. She says that, and they have the time machine. Then that's how they sent their training, simulator back. They do make mention of it. So they sort of gloss it over, but I think that's the fun of it, is it's just so damn stupid. Personally.
I think that also it's telling that they explain it and then they almost like if they bring it up again, it's like for one sentence because I think you're right, Dave, that it's just it doesn't stand up to any scrutiny. And so they're like, let's establish this and move on as quickly as we can. And I agree that it also doesn't make sense in that part of the reason why they're coming back and why they need somebody in the first place is because they know so little about Cronish and that clearly this, the Biotic Wars have wiped out their knowledge of history. And so the idea that they could have the technology to create this game, and at the same time, could be so ignorant about the past and so confused in other ways, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. But I mean, that had not even occurred to me until you mentioned it.
Really? Okay. How about Tom? What do you think about this?
Yeah, it didn't really bother me. I think because I didn't really care about the logic of that too much. I was so busy having so much fun with everything that I didn't really stop to think about it. But now that you mention it, I'm like, yeah, okay, that doesn't make any sense. But maybe it does because maybe there's more going on in the future. They haven't really shown us what happens in the future, and there was technology there because they stole the time machine. They got a lot of technology from the Biotics, and they also made reference a couple of times. There were a couple of geniuses, or at least one genius on their team. So maybe they didn't have anything to do with making the game, but maybe, I don't know, maybe there's some way it can make sense, but it didn't really bother me. It was such a fun ride the whole time that I never really stopped to be like, wait a minute.
Well, and also for me, it was like the minute they do that, they come back and say they're recruiting him. I'm like, this is the plot to The Last Starfighter. And then they actually say, wait, you have Josh say, wait, this is the plot to The Last Starfighter.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh, perfection.
Right,
well,
exactly.
Well, right. I listened to an interview with some of the creators of the show, and they said something about in the future they only use video games for training. Like, they can't even imagine the idea that someone would just do this for recreation. So, like, if someone beats the game, the only reason they could be playing it at all was because they're training to do this stuff in real life. I think that's part of the thinking behind it. I mean, that still doesn't address my, how do they make a game? Like, how do they get it into stores and, without electricity and get it back through? I mean, my impression was they stole the time machine right before they came back to get Josh. So how did they see the game? I know Andrea doesn't care about any of this stuff.
I don't care. You're trying to apply logic to a comedy show. I'm just saying.
All right, but that's what we do here on Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. We take these things very seriously.
Very seriously. I'm sorry. I'll take the comedy show seriously.
I mean, I think also that part of what makes it funny and good, though, is that in some other ways they're very creative about the time travel stuff. The fact that, and I think in this cartoonish but also I think true way where every time they go back and try to change something, there are a million unforeseen consequences. And in a lot of ways, I mean, it feels smarter in those moments. And so it's not that I think none of it holds together or makes sense. It's I think there are areas of the time travel that they really do care about and have thought through. And then there's areas where this is the idea, just go with it.
Right. So I'll be very curious. None of us, I don't think, have watched any of season 2. Because I wanted this to just be a discussion of season 1. So maybe there's stuff in season 2 that explains all this, but I'll be curious when I get around to watching season 2 to see if they sort of backfill, if they fill in the backstory and if they tie this stuff together in a way that makes sense. It seems like it would be hard to do, but I guess we'll see.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, at this point, I don't care. If they go back and they don't, it's totally fine. I bought the whole premise.
Yeah. All right, well, so let's talk about what happens next. So I mentioned that Tiger and Wolf come back and recruit Josh and are very disappointed that he can't fight or anything. And so they tell him that the boss that he works for, Dr. Elias Cronish, the founder of this STD research lab, that he in the future winds up creating a cure for all diseases that somehow creates a sort of mutant race that they're fighting against that sort of takes over the world. And so they've come back in time to stop this from happening. And so Josh says, oh, well, and just at work that day, his boss, who has herpes and so has a cold sore on his lip, had told him the story of how he first got this infection. That it had happened the night of the moon landing, when he had kissed some woman at a fraternity party. And so Josh says to Tiger and Wolf, "Oh, well, if we go back in time to the night of the moon landing and stop him from getting herpes, then he'll never go into science, and it'll stop the whole biotic menace from occurring." So Tom, what do you think of the when they go back in time to the night of the moon landing?
Are we? Was that episode 2? That we're into now? Okay.
Yeah, that's episode 2.
I really like that. I really like that episode. There was some other things in episode 1 that I was kind of sticking on that I wanted to just mention. First of all, Haley Joel Osment. I thought the casting and the acting from everybody were amazing. I didn't think. I mean, and Haley Joel Osment in the role he was in was fantastic. I mean, sorry doesn't re-swab urethras. I thought that was pretty awesome. But anyway, that was episode 1. So
actually, sorry, Tom. Now that you mentioned it, I should have talked about Tiger and Wolf end up killing a police officer in episode 1, and that comes back. So we should talk about that. So
this is episode 1. The back in time, that was episode 1. Pardon me. Is that what you're saying here? That I'm getting a little confused with my episode.
They go back. I think they go back in time towards the end of episode 1, and then there's more of that in episode 2.
Yeah.
Okay. So episode 1. Are you asking me about the killing the police officer?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I really liked that scene. And not because I have anything against police officers, but because in so many shows that would have been handled as like, well, we have to have them like, the cops are coming, so we're going to show that these really like badasses from the future are just going to like kill everybody, and we'll just like kill these generic cops and move on with the story. But instead of doing that, they make it like. They make the cops actual characters, and they make them not only characters, but they make them these really young, idealistic, like, hey, this is our first call ever as policemen. We're actually real policemen, and we're gonna go on our first call. And they're like, let's go get them, and then that happens. So it just makes it such a great scene because they're like, no, we're not gonna make these throwaway characters. We're gonna make them real people, and then we're actually gonna pull them into the plot after that. So. I thought it was brilliant.
And then one of them, the one who survives out of the 2 cops, he has to go to the family of the other one and tell them that his partner has died.
That was hilarious. That was Oh my god.
Yeah, that you would never believe that a scene where a cop has to go to his dead partner's wife's house and like explain to her while she's pregnant that her husband is dead. You would never believe that could be hilarious. You just wouldn't. But the way they treated it I was like, I can't believe they're playing this for comedy, number 1, and number 2, I can't believe they're really succeeding.
Oh, yeah.
Like it was shocking and just made me respect the writers so much.
Yeah, so what happens? Yeah, so and it's just like so he goes to the family, and then it turns out like the whole family's there, and like every time he's going to say something, some new relative comes in, and it just keeps going and going, and oh my god, it was
Can I make a quick comment on it? I think it might still be episode 1. The whole show is references to various movies, like not just Last Starfighter, Terminator, and all the others, Back to the Future. But there is like in the first episode where they kill all the bikers and ride off on their bikes. They're all dressed like the characters in Easy Rider, and they do that through the entire show. Is just like these little jokes about different movies that are never really mentioned. It's like if you get it, you get it. They're all little Easter eggs, which I thought was really fantastic. If you're a movie person, you'll get it. And also just the scene where they're in the diner and she's having a breakdown and she just starts screaming at everybody, "You're dead! You're all dead! You're dead! You're dead! You're totally dead!
Little girl, you're dead!
Little kid, you're dead!"
Wait, what about Are you just saying that's funny, or was there?
I just thought that was I wrote it down on my notes. I was like, that's the funniest thing ever. So.
Yeah, I did too. I took notes on it. I said the diner scene was brilliant. You know, he says, "You don't have delis in the future," and she says, "No, we live in the sewer. We eat garbage and rats." And he goes, "Ew," and the guy goes, "No crap, ew. A rat, you eat a rat, then say ew."
Well, and that part in the diner where she's screaming, "You're all dead," is a very clear callback to Sarah Connor in Terminator 2.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, but let's get to the frat house. So, Anthony, what'd you think of the frat house?
I liked it. I have to say that at this point, after sort of seeing how crazy things get in later episodes, it makes less of an impression on me now. But I think that was a really well done party where like. Just the way everything kind of escalates. And I mean, this is the structure of a lot of the episodes where, you know, one bad thing kind of like happens on top of another. And this is kind of like one of the first cases where you really get to see that happen, where he ends up in an astronaut. Well, I guess they get kicked out, and then to sneak back in, he puts on an astronaut suit, but then that just sort of leads to all kinds of confusion. And then at one point he's in a dance-off with Cronish for the affections of this woman, and then also like, and yeah, it's really, really well done. I think also just like, I liked all the different glimpses we got of like Dr. Cronish at different points in his life, including as this sort of young, horny college student.
Yeah, it's like not all the humor in this show is like super smart, but I thought a lot of the humor in this was pretty smart. You know, like it was fun. I started rewatching the show this morning, and I was just planning to rewatch the first couple episodes to refresh my memory for some of the ones I'd watched farther back in the past, and I ended up just rewatching the whole season. But
Wow.
My girlfriend was sitting there, and so it gets to the part where he's you know in danger of losing the dance off, and he's watching the moon landing on TV, and Stephanie was like, "Oh, he's going to do the moonwalk."
Yeah.
And yeah, I was like, "Yep, that's exactly what's about to happen."
Yeah. Well, I had that same reaction. I'm like, they signal it from, you know, a million miles away. You can see it coming. Doesn't, you know, it's still funny.
Yeah, and there's just a lot of smart humor in this. In this episode.
What also feels remarkable about it is how like it like kind of, you know, touches on all this stuff that feels like it could be really like hot button or, you know, kind of more like serious satirical humor, but it's able to be so light and so smart that like obviously part of what they're dealing with is like segregation and discrimination and all of that, but like it doesn't have to confront any of that. They have little jokes that nod at it, but it's never like the point of the episode, or it's not like a moment where it gets serious. It's all sort of acknowledged, and then they have their jokes at the same time.
Yeah, and it just draws really interesting connections between the past and the present, where, you know, the guy's like, "That's a pretty good Bill Cosby impression, but what does Bill Cosby have to do with Jell-O?" And then he's like, I forget exactly what the line is, but he says
he says, he goes, I didn't know you could make me hate Bill Cosby or something like that.
He's like, the way you told that joke made me not like
Yes.
Bill Cosby. And he's like, yeah, get used to that.
Get used to that.
I guess part of it is how fast it is. It's just like it brings up stuff and then it just like joke and then move on, and like you don't have to like sort of linger on any of it.
Oh, yeah. It's all like it's a series of throwaway jokes where it's like they throw it at you, you get it, you laugh, you don't get it, you move on to the next joke, and it's just like rapid fire humor, and it's fantastic.
That's how you know you're in good hands with the writer, is that the writer has enough confidence to know, like, I'm gonna throw these jokes out there, and we're not gonna milk anything. The director too, is a lot of that's down to the director. We're not gonna milk anything. We're not gonna like wink at the audience. We're not gonna make sure they got it. We're gonna throw the joke out there and have enough confidence to say certain amount of people are gonna get this and love it, and then we're gonna bust on to the next joke.
Yeah.
Well, and also I feel like in almost every comedy, there's like good jokes, and then there's jokes that totally fall flat. And like I didn't feel like any of the jokes in this were. I never was like, oh, that's just not funny at all, you know, or that's you know like it felt like every joke was hitting, you know, was either like great or at least pretty good, you know.
Yep, I
agree
with that.
I think like one of the types of humor that I like the least are referential humor, and so I think those jokes for me I didn't laugh as much, but like, for example, like the last Starfighter joke, I was like, yeah. But I didn't like dislike it. I was like, all right, that's fine. That was like reasonably well done. Sure. But most of the jokes I thought were great.
Well, the last Starfighter joke for me is funny just as a writer, because it's like when it's such an obvious ripoff and everybody else is saying, oh, this is the last Starfighter. They actually acknowledge it. Like they just flat out go, okay, yep, we stole it from Last Starfighter. And I appreciate that as a writer. It's like, thank you. You just made me laugh, and you acknowledge the fact that that's exactly what I'm thinking right now. So
yeah, I agree, because you could sit there and be like, oh, they just ripped that off, and then you kind of get hung up on it. But they're like, no, we trust us. We know we ripped this off. We did it on purpose. And you're like, oh, okay, fine. Like it doesn't have to be like super funny to be like, oh, good, that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
Well, right. And so what happens is that, so Josh thinks that he's cock-blocked Cronish and that Cronish is not going to get herpes. But then they return to Josh's time and Cronish still has herpes and he's still pursuing his cure. And one of those references is that, every time Josh notices something like that's changed in his present, it plays this little like doo-doo-doo-doo like sound that's like straight out of, it's like the exact same thing as Back to the Future.
Yeah.
I totally forgot about that.
And it makes me wonder, for people who haven't seen, I don't know if anyone hasn't seen Back to the Future or Terminator or whatever, but do you have to get if you don't get any of the references at all, does this show still work?
It's still funny. All the jokes, the sex jokes, I think all those jokes work. I don't think you lose a layer of the humor, but I don't think it's not funny. I don't think it renders it unfunny because it's not specifically predicated just on these movie jokes. Personally.
Yeah.
I also think a lot of the science fictional humor, it's funnier if you realize, oh, like this is sort of a reference to Last Starfighter, to Back to the Future, to all these things. But I think also it's funny because it's situationally funny of like, oh, I thought I could fix it by doing this. Oh, I didn't realize it was going to have this effect. And I think that's funny on its own regardless of reference.
Yeah.
Right. So you never felt that it was too referential. Or I guess Anthony, was saying maybe some of the like when Josh is acknowledging, or I
didn't even dislike it. It's just that's like a form of humor that just doesn't really work for me most of the time. And so I like, even when it's sort of like something like this, which is like squarely in my wheelhouse, I feel like I'm sort of being pandered to. But I didn't dislike. I was just like, all right, I just sort of shrugged and moved on. And I will say, I mean, I guess the one sort of referential thing which might be sort of incomprehensible if you're not aware of it was the James Cameron episode, but that one I really liked it so much anyway that I'm not going to complain about that. That was actually referential humor that I really liked.
That once we get to it, that was hands down my favorite episode for so many reasons.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I'm trying to I feel like we could just go through and talk about every joke and how well it works, but I feel like that's not that valuable. People can just watch the show.
Yeah.
Right.
But well, actually, let me bring up then my other sort of, or I don't know if this is an issue exactly, but so it develops that so boy, what happens exactly? So they okay, so it turns out that there are what do you call them, biotic sleeper agents in the present who are some of his office mates, some of Josh's office mates, and he doesn't know who they are. And so I guess this is because their time machine is broken, and so they need to, interrogate a biotic to get another time machine or to fix their time machine, whatever. And so they're going to have to identify who's a biotic and who isn't. And so it turns out that the biotics are immune to poison. So they're going to just poison non-fatally, non-lethally poison the entire office and see who doesn't get sick. And then that's going to identify who the biotics are. And so this leads to them identifying that the woman in the office that Josh has a crush on is a biotic, and so they're going to interrogate her. And then I thought the story got, we've talked about how referential the show is and how everything is just pulled from different movies and things. But this I thought was genuinely interesting, where so they're interrogating the office mate, and she tells Josh no, you're fighting on the wrong side. These people that you're fighting with, Tiger and Wolf, they're
Yeah.
like terrorists. They're like ISIS, you know, they're like anti-vaxxers and like actually we're not biotics. That's just a dumb name they made up for us. Like we've built this perfect society where like there's like, and she's like, I forget, oh, what is she? It's like funny what she says, like the sort of mundane stuff about her family and stuff.
I'm from New Jersey. You know, in my world, I'm a 4.
Yeah. But so I thought that was a great twist, and I did wonder if they were actually going to go in that direction. That he actually has been on the wrong side for the first 5 episodes.
I agree with that. I thought exactly the same thing because as they're having this conversation, I'm like, these people are anti-vaxxers. Oh my god! And I really thought they were going to go in that direction, and I'm kind of hoping maybe they will next season. But yeah, I thought it was a really interesting little twist that they just didn't even follow. So, yes, I agree with you.
Well, and it made so much sense because you're like, it's just sort of an interesting commentary on how easily you fall into different sides of an argument or whatever. But you're like, wait, like I've been thinking that these guys were the good guys, even though they've been going around killing people and like they're like crazy and all this stuff. Like, why did I just assume that they were the good guys just because I heard their side of the story first?
Yeah.
Tom, what'd you think about this future, this alternative view of the future that we start to get?
Yeah, I mean, I thought that was it hit me the same way that it hit you. I kind of was thinking, well, maybe he is on the wrong side of this, you know. But I didn't really believe it because there was something about what she had done and what she was saying that didn't jibe, and I can't remember what it was, but I kept thinking, well, if what she's saying is true, then how does she explain this? And it kept making me think, no, they're not going to go in that direction. And I can't remember right now what it was, but it was just something about like that they had no compunction about killing people themselves in order to, the biotics had no reservations about what they were doing either. So I kept thinking, no, I don't think it's going to go that way.
So you think that she's lying, like, because there's 2 possibilities, right? 'Cause she could be lying to manipulate him, or she could be telling the truth from her perspective. But you think that she's actually, the future is nothing like what how she's describing it.
No, I thought that she was telling the truth from her perspective, but I also thought that how she got to what they had was. I think she knew that they got there by doing really evil things. And I can't remember what those are right now. I remember when I was watching her talk, at first I was like, oh, maybe it's kind of seeming like maybe she's right. And then I thought it was some detail that I was like, no, she knows that they've done evil things, that they're just like, what they're striving for is great, but they're excluding a whole giant section of humanity and just like killing them whole cloth anyway. In order to supposedly protect what they're doing these horrible things. And I can't remember what that was now. So, but I remember just saying, no, she's not being honest.
Anthony, do you have anything you want to add there?
Yeah, I mean, it also, as you were talking about it, made me think of, there's a specific line where she says, oh yeah, and they bomb hospitals. And then Tiger says, no, they're sterilization centers. And she says, no, they're hospitals where people are also sterilized. And that actually was like the moment where I think probably I had a similar question of like, oh, wow, are they really going to sort of turn it around? Because that like feels like a legitimate criticism of these characters. I also wanted to say that.
Sorry, Anthony, let me say point of order. I think what Tiger says is no, they're injection sites. So it's not. That's the sterilization, I think, is separate. I think that was with poison gas kind of thing or something she says later. But I think that when there's the debate over whether they hospitals or injection sites, it sounds to me like they really are more like hospitals, although maybe you're forced to get vaccinated, but you're not being forced to be sterilized, I don't think.
Okay. I maybe conflating the two, but that essentially they are. It sounds like there's no argument that they actually are bombing hospitals. Regardless of sort of how you describe them. But yeah, I think that scene, and then there's a later scene where I think in both cases you're sort of given these like very kind of quick, rapid histories of the creation of the biotics and the creation of the resistance. And I have to admit that I didn't completely follow it either time. So by the end of the series, I couldn't actually tell you what distinguishes a biotic from a human, like how much free will they have, like why the resistance decided to fight them in the first place. And so a lot of that is kind of fuzzy in my head because it felt like they kind of went over it fairly quickly, which didn't bother me. But as we talk about it, I think that was definitely a question mark I had. One other thing I wanted to say about that's, oh, go ahead.
Oh, well, keep your thought, but one of the things, this might not be the thing I was thinking of, but one of the things that was bothering me while she was talking about this utopia is like, well, if it's such a utopia, then why do you have a bomb in your head that blows up? Like, if you do the wrong thing, like, I don't understand how that makes it such this great world, but go ahead.
No, I had the same thought. That said, the moment when because like there's one of the great things, and this was definitely one of my favorite episodes of the season. One of the great things about it is they have this timer that they don't keep on the whole time, but that you do see, like, they keep flashing back to, and you know that, you know, once the timer reaches 0, her head is going to explode. And so he's giving this very confident speech with 30 seconds left, and the head explodes. And then they come in, they're like, oh yeah, there's sort of like a 30-second window there, you know, kind of give or take. It's so good.
Not exact.
Well, it's kind of a play on 24, where you have the running time, which, you know, in like a movie that ratchets up the tenseness because you're watching the time tick down and you're hoping they're going to get it. So the fact that they did that and then joked with it at the end and screwed it up was just, I thought, was brilliant, to be honest.
Yeah, and even Josh says, like, he makes his point, you know, and he really, like, burns her, and then he goes, now you just sit there and think about that for the next 30 seconds, and then her head blows up. In his face.
Yeah.
But I thought, that episode particularly, I started thinking it was a lot more like a Quentin Tarantino, like Pulp Fiction type of movie. It was just so unexpected, and the characters were kind of so free to do whatever they wanted to do, and didn't really seem like the characters. You know, some movies you watch and you think, okay, the writer really wants the plot to happen this way, so there's like this middle portion of the movie where the characters are doing things that make no sense, and you're like, I don't understand why these characters are doing these things, but they're doing them, and I imagine there's going to be some payoff in about 20 minutes where you're going to be like, oh, well, the characters had to do that to get here. I understand it now. But there was none of that in this show. It was like the characters were just completely set free in like a Tarantino or Vonnegut kind of way, where they could just do whatever they wanted, and that was driving what was happening. I thought that was really fun. I thought it was very well written and directed. And like, for example, in that episode you're talking about, when he first starts to learn how to cook, I thought I was like, wow, I didn't see that coming at all. He just like loves cooking. He gets into it. But when he first starts to get into it, and Ed Begley Jr., who, again, like everybody else in this, just did a fantastic job acting. He tells him, beat the eggs. And it's such a, like, tired joke. Like, you know, it's like this literal humor. You know he's going to beat the eggs with his fists. He's going to beat them up. But the execution of it was so great. And he's, like, doing his, like, video game voice. He's like, egg smash! Your shell is weak! And he like gets all into it. I knew what was coming. Like, I knew it was coming from a mile away, but I still was laughing at it. I still thought it was an awesome scene.
There's something a little satisfying about knowing a joke is coming and then watching it happen. There's just something that's like, you know the sneeze is coming, and then you sneeze, and oh, I feel so much better.
Well, and that, as Tom was saying, that there's such a commitment to not just like, he doesn't just like hit the eggs, he like beats the hell out of them for like 10 seconds and is like, again, doing that voice, and then like, the whole room is covered in egg yolk, and
Your
that's
shell
really
is weak.
What sells it.
Yeah.
Right. I did want to disagree on with one point though. I would say the one issue I had with the show was I did feel like I could kind of see the writers trying to stretch the plot out to 13 episodes, and so there was like a little bit of like, okay, I can just because I know we're on episode 8 or 9, that obviously this can't be the thing that fixes it, because there's and then I could see them like trying to be, okay, like, what's the next thing we can come up with that sort of stretches the story out? And I didn't really mind that, because I wasn't necessarily watching for the story, but I did feel like I could see a little bit of the writers trying to come up with the next thing.
Well, I thought in terms of pacing, the story was basically perfect up until the James Cameron episode, which I thought was as other people have said, like the highlight of the show for me. And then I felt like after that, it was still funny, but it felt a little more flabby and like you're saying, stretching it out. Do you agree with that it got flabbier after that episode, or do you think even before that episode that it was?
I think you're right. And it's hard to say if I think it was less funny or the writing was less good, but I think that there was a certain sense of I felt the effort of just the plot of stretching out the plot seemed a little bit more evident to me.
I don't know that I found it very well paced. It didn't bother me at all. I know what you mean, Dave, about, especially the episode where where Tiger and Wolf both have whole lives, spend several years in a past and then they all come back to 2017. But it didn't bother me. And I felt because these episodes are all half an hour long instead of the regular, 45 minutes long that you would get in an hour show. I thought that helped them be very tight and paced well. So it didn't, it's 13 episodes. So that's 6.5 hours of content. I thought that was pretty good, actually.
Yeah, well, I'll say, I mean, I thought, I really, the episode you're talking about where they Tiger and Wolf spent whole lives, basically, or years in the different time periods, I really admired the sort of ingenuity of that and, how it was breaking up the format and stuff. But I did feel, I was getting a little restless watching that. And it was the same thing with, which episode was it? It was the one where they're back in time at Cronish's house, and there's all the different characters coming in and out, and
I love that episode though.
Okay, I mean I don't know that I would even change anything, but those two episodes were the ones where I felt like the pacing. I sort of felt a little restless watching them.
I agree. I thought that that episode where they go back in time and she becomes suddenly this Southern belle. I was just kind of mystified. I was like, why is she suddenly became this other person?
So funny.
I don't know. It's cool in a way.
And it goes black and white.
I know.
Right.
It's so funny.
I loved it in the next episode where they came back and she was like, oh, I've had this other life. I was like, okay, I can kind of see why they did that. But when I was actually watching the episode, I was kind of like, this is kind of different. And I don't know, I didn't really buy into that one as much, I guess. That one episode.
You know what's funny? Actually, now that I think about it, the thing that never paid off is the fact that she has the locket and Cronish should, remember her from his childhood. And I thought that was going to play into the end, and it never did.
Maybe it will.
Yeah, well, the locket plays into the ending in another way, but it's true that she never gets reunited with him.
Yes, yeah, that specific thing. She never gets reunited with him. He never recognizes her. So...
Well, but his parents don't recognize him. I mean, that's a theme throughout the show, You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Right.
Right. It's not implausible. It's more just that it seemed like they were setting up some kind of reunion and it was never paid off.
Yeah, I agree.
Right.
I mean, Cronish was 4 years old or something when she left, so he wouldn't necessarily remember her anyway.
I remember stuff from when I was 2 or 3. People. I do.
What were you going to say, Tom?
I was just wondering about, because I had the same thought about Back to the Future when, when Marty's there and they don't remember, they name him Marty because they really like the kid Marty who shows up and, matchmakes them. But then they don't notice that he's the same person. And I wonder, I was thinking about that, would you notice? Because when you have a kid, you're around them every day, and your memory would be slowly changing over time. But I'm thinking back and I'm like, if I had a son who looked exactly like somebody I knew when I was 17, exactly, and same mannerisms and everything, I would be I would flat out remember. I would think this is crazy.
Well, especially if you had sex with that kid, right?
Well, but it was one night, and that they were all they were high and drunk and all, I
well,
actually,
that's a good point. Yeah.
It made sense to me.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's talk about the James Cameron episode, because I think, Andrea, you mentioned that earlier. So talk about what's your thoughts were about the James Cameron episode?
Well, they discover in the episode before, which is when the girl's head explodes, the biotic, that their time machine has been damaged and the power source isn't working. So they have to get more a power source, and it's some kind of weird green liquid that is called Cameronian that they were told is available everywhere in our time. But Josh has no idea what it is. So the biotic tells him it's called Cameronian because it was named after James Cameron, who took his submarine to the bottom of the ocean and drilled in and found it somewhere near the Earth's core. So completely ridiculous. And then they decide after her head explodes, they have to go find this Cameronian, and it's in the future in like 2024. In James Cameron's house, and they go to James Cameron's house and they break in, and it's a smart house. So there's an AI that lets them in and talks to them. And the AI has been programmed to constantly, praise James Cameron. So it's just this escalating ridiculousness of calling him like, he is the best driver in the world. He is the smartest man on the planet. And it just goes crazy.
Wait, I wrote down a couple. Wait, can I find
it?
The
well-known door expert, James Cameron. and then my ultimate favorite, I have to say this out loud. Good at marriage, James Cameron.
Yeah, I wrote that one down. The other ones I have are undefeated Little League coach and honorary black belt.
Honorary black belt.
I just imagine the writers sitting there coming up with more and more ridiculous things in the writer's room and just dying laughing, because I would just be sitting there dying laughing. I just thought that was you could see the writer's hands on it, but just in the best way possible.
I wrote one down too. He has a Venezuelan frog species named after him, unlike lesser director Steven Spielberg.
It's funny, because my girlfriend's parents now live in Asheville, North Carolina, and there's this big, I think it's the largest private home in the U.S. It's called the Biltmore. And we went on the tour there, and we had the audio tour, and it's just like that. It's like just constantly praising the family and how great they were at everything and how much everyone loved them. And you're listening to this the whole time, and you're like, come on, there must have been like somebody had an affair with a servant, or like, somebody hated their boss or whatever,
Was that the Vanderbilt house?
Yeah, the Vanderbilt house.
Yeah. They had to sell that immediately because it was so expensive they couldn't afford to keep it.
Yeah, I don't remember. I was so put off by how the constant praise, but it was like, it reminds me of so much of just the like nonstop, like deification, hagiography of the, owner of the house. Yeah.
And the fact that it's James Cameron is part of what makes it perfect, because he's such this like over the top, larger than life figure. And I mean, I have to say, like, there's a New Yorker profile of James Cameron that ran about a decade ago when Avatar was coming out, and it remains one of my like favorite director profiles or celebrity profiles ever written, because he's just such a ridiculous figure. And I don't mean this entirely in an insulting way, that he has accomplished all these amazing things and, has done all this stuff, and yet is still like so kind of silly and ridiculous and wants to, and there's something about him that's sort of inherently funny.
Yeah.
So the combination of that treatment for that real person is so spot on.
Yeah.
Well, and James Cameron makes a cameo at the end of the episode. So like,
is it actually him?
Oh, I think it is. Yeah. I was.
No, I don't think you don't see him though. You only see like a shape. Like a hand and the back of a head.
I thought it was. It sounds like him. I don't know. I was just
Google that.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yeah. I was wondering, like, do they need to get permission? Like there was another thing where, after Wolf spends a couple years in the 80s, and somebody just makes a reference to Groundhog Day, and he's like, "Yeah, Groundhog Day, Andy McDowell, I hit that."
Yeah.
Yeah, that was awesome.
I was like,
no, none of that needs clearance. None of that. It's a joke.
Really?
None of it. No.
Huh.
They might. The only thing that I think maybe they might have is because the AI teaches Wolf How to Speak Not Me through the
I had the same thought, yeah.
And that would be copyrighted. So I don't know if maybe they got some kind of permission to do that. I don't know. That's just my, producer brain who immediately hears that and goes, I gotta call a lawyer. So.
I do, and I guess it also makes me, one of the points about, like, that Tom was making earlier about sort of, like, poking fun at celebrities, poking fun at themselves, and I think, like, I could also imagine, though, that, like, Cameron would want to be involved in the sense of, like, you want to show that you're in on the joke, right? Like, that's one of the easiest ways to kind of, like, make yourself seem more accessible is to do this sort of funny character version of you, like ridiculous character version of yourself, and always like make it clear I'm playing a character, because I'm in on the joke and I have a sense of humor about myself. So I could in this case, I'm genuinely not sure, but it seems like I don't think it was him, and I don't think they necessarily needed much cooperation from him.
Here's my thought on this. I'm guessing that it was so over the top, like at some points actually mean to him, especially the marriage one is hilarious, but that is kind of mean, that I'm wondering if maybe they did ask him and he said no. And they were like, well, fuck it. Let's go to town. Because I think we did that once.
Wait, let's just, before we go too far, let's just Google this and settle this.
Okay.
So Anthony, Google this. While Andrea's talking, just Google this and see if you can find out.
Okay.
Well, I was just saying,
all right.
We did it once on Conan where we, some celebrity, did something obnoxious, like backed out or wouldn't come on or something, or backed out at the last minute. I think it was, backed out at the last minute. And I think it was Rod Stewart. And he screwed us over like really badly. So what they did was we used to have this character called Oldie Olson, which was like he was a really, really wrinkled old man. And we said that we dressed him up like Rod Stewart and had him come up and we played like, some Rod Stewart song and had Oldie pretend to be Rod Stewart. And we're like, and here's Rod Stewart. And it was just like this fuck you to Rod Stewart, which makes me think that this might be that kind of situation. Because it was just such a big middle finger to him.
That reminds me of the Mojo Nixon song, Don Henley Must Die. And he sings, it's like, Don Henley must die, don't let him get back together with Glenn Fry. And he was in concert one night, and Don Henley got up on stage with him and sung it with him. It just makes you think, well, he's got to be a great guy to be able to do that.
This is completely going off the rails here, but if you get a chance to watch the Eagles, documentary on like HBO, they go into this whole thing about how the two of them hated each other and were in fact cursing each other out on stage. And they caught it like on the backstage. Yeah. Like on the backstage, the guys on the board, the audio guys caught it and they played it like the two of them cursing at each other. And it's hilarious.
All right. Let's bring it back to James Cameron here. So I have another line I wanted to read that I thought was brilliant. So and the house, smart house is called Sigourney, which is obviously like a reference to Sigourney Weaver. But so one of the things she says is that like she's complaining about James Cameron, and she says he never takes my screenplay notes. And she says, you know what you get when you ignore me? Unobtainium and characters who fornicate with their ponytails.
Oh God, I think I have to go back and just watch that episode because it was so masterful.
I love that too, how she starts to like have a character of her own. She starts out as just this like AI, and then she starts to have this real deep character, and she starts to kind of lose it when she talks about him, and she refers to him at one point as diabolical Canadian James Cameron. And then
he's coming back
Canada joke.
He's coming back, and Tiger says like, we can take him, and Wolf's like, no, you can't even believe all the things this guy can do. He's we're no match for him. All right, so Anthony, do we have a verdict on whether he had a cameo or anything?
I don't know there's nothing that explicitly says that he had a cameo, but the way they talk about him in some interviews where they're like, oh, we were worried we'd get a call from his people, makes me think that he wasn't actually involved. It was just, that they treated it. Yeah. That I think apparently he asked them for DVDs after he heard about it, but I don't think he was involved.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I see that too. His office reached out to us. This is the, director, I think, saying his office reached out to us after season 1 and wanted DVDs of the episodes.
I've been in that situation where I've had to give bad how do I even phrase this? Bad news to somebody who was referenced on a TV show, and that is so awkward. Like, you're sitting there going, oh my God, is he going to be mad?
Actually, Andrea, I was kind of curious, because since cooking plays such a large role in this show, and you're interested in cooking, what did you think of the way that cooking was portrayed in the show?
I thought it was brilliant. It's like the over-the-top, ridiculous fetishization of food and cooking and chefs, I thought was so good. And it's also because it's very timely, because we are in this weird age of chefs and cooking and cuisine being a fetish. Do you know how many cooking shows and baking shows there are on Netflix? Quite a few. It's ridiculous. And the fact that they went and made it a whole ridiculous plot point, I thought was fantastic. It was a great joke and very, very, very timely.
Well, right. So Wolf starts up this underground restaurant where they actually kidnap people and bring them to the restaurant, and then they think they're going to die, and then they get fed, and they just can't believe how good the food tastes. And again, my girlfriend Stephanie was watching that. She's like, "Oh, that's actually a good idea," because she's really into those kinds of like immersive theater like kinds of things. Like that would make the food taste really good. You know?
Yeah, that is a brilliant idea. Not that I would do it. I'm not going to say anybody should do it, but it's such the wonderfully logically ridiculous, extension of the stupid things people do in restaurants these days. And because I worked on a cooking show, I did a lot of research about crazy ass things that people people do their restaurants around. Honestly, they're only like maybe 2 rungs on the stupid ladder below that.
When he's serving like something, whatever with guacamole, and everyone's like eating it, and they're like, "Oh my!" They're just like rapturous.
There was a restaurant we found a few years ago that sold gourmet water for like $45 a bottle. I'm not kidding. That's a true thing.
Wow.
Yeah. So there you go.
It also reminded me of like the, cause I, was not an adult in the 80s and don't know a lot about the restaurant scene in the 80s. So I think most of my idea of that comes from American Psycho. And it definitely also reminded me a little bit of that idea of sort of, that sort of desperation to get, a seat in the most ridiculous exclusive restaurant, which I think is, still exists, something that exists today, but it like, but it like resonated with that of like, oh yeah, it sort of like feels like an extension and like also like all the cocaine use. It's like, all right, yeah, sure. This feels right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That reference, Anthony, just reminded me of, a great piece in L.A. Story, a Steve Martin movie from a long time ago, where like, everybody's talking about getting into this exclusive restaurant called Lidio.
Lidio.
And they keep mentioning the word Lidio, and then when they finally get there, the sign is L''idiot. It's
Yep.
Oh, that whole sequence. I mean, everything in L.A. Story is brilliant, but yeah, the whole thing with the restaurant. I don't want to just go through it all, but like people go watch L.A. Story and particularly pay attention to the restaurant part because that's brilliant.
Yeah.
What else I got? Okay, so my other criticism of the show, and you guys are gonna say I'm just like like nitpicking the time travel stuff, but like, why is there an evil Juice when Josh comes back to the present when that never happened the other time that he came back to the present? Why is there suddenly like, and that's the whole Back to the Future thing is when you come back to your own time, there's not another version of you. Like you've become whoever the version of you is in that time.
Well, so there is an explanation, even though I didn't find it very satisfying, was that there's a line about how specifically when he tells his uncle to buy the AOL shares, he's creating a fork in his own life. Right. And they say that's why that created a duplicate, which again, is something you're like, what? Why? That doesn't make any sense, but that is the explanation they offer.
Number one, it made sense to me, but number two, it was hilarious that he explains the plot of the show on a whiteboard. Like in the show, he's like, okay, guys, here's what's happening. He's got a whiteboard and he's like explaining to the 2 other characters what's happening. I thought that was brilliant. I was just like laughing like that's brilliant. And number two, I did think it made sense because he's saying when you go back in time, you create an alternate timeline, and now he's in this alternate timeline, and in the alternate timeline, maybe not, but I was gonna say they don't come back. They don't take that Juice back in time with them. So when he gets back to that, when he enters back into that timeline, he's now the guy from the other timeline, and he's forward in this timeline, and that Juice hasn't gone back in time, so he's still there. But I don't know. If I keep thinking about that, maybe it doesn't
Don't think
make
about
sense.
it.
No, he did go. Yeah, he went back in time with them to make that specific fork because the fork is created when he's back in time and says, buy the AOL stock or take the AOL job and buy the stock.
How is that different from when he like breaks into his own house and then they have a gun in the house?
Because he didn't
That is
change
why it
that
doesn't-
timeline enough to where there was he didn't change that timeline enough. Like, they still came back and got him and brought him back in time in that timeline, even though he changed a lot of things. But in the other timeline where it's Juice, they don't come back in time to get Juice. They do something completely different.
I think what happens is it's sort of implied that if the change is big enough to your specific life that it creates a fork, and a fork creates a duplicate. But like, you're like, well, okay, well then what is the amount of change that is like enough that you would have a duplicate? Why would there not be a duplicate in these other situations? I have a lot of questions.
I'm sorry. I just got to point out the ridiculousness of having a logic argument about a comedy show about time travel. I'm just saying.
That's a good point.
Can I just bring up here that episode where he fights with Juice in the bathroom where they're naked? We have to go back an episode from there to where they have the unstable Cameronian in their time machine, and it mixes them up so that the Josh ends up with Wolf's penis, and they switch penises.
And he's like, hey, that's mine!
And he goes, you're a cock pirate, which was hilarious. And then he looks down, he says, that's a pathetically small cock. It's lacking its warrior's mane. And then they pay that off in the fight scene in the shower because they're naked, and Josh has this giant schlong. And I just thought that was like, boy, you went there, guys. Good for you. God bless Josh Hutcherson.
Well, and they pay it. I thought you were going to say they pay it off at the very end, where
yes, that's a second payoff. Yes.
Yeah, where Wolf basically says like, I'm not even upset that you got my cock. You deserved it. You know.
No, but there's another joke when they blow off steam having sex, and they pull him in, and he just goes afterwards. He says to him, "I'm fucking you with your cock." Sorry, am I the only one who thinks that's hilarious?
No, it's hilarious.
That was really good.
Do we need to reiterate that the show's not for everybody?
Right. Right.
And not for children either.
I guess so, but to the point about like arguing about like the time travel mechanics again, I want to say yes, fundamentally none of this stuff really bothered me, but I do think that at times, I mean, there are things about the show that are good about where they think about how the time travel will work. So I think that it is like, I don't think it's totally ridiculous to say we should think about this a little, because I think the show wants us to. I think like actually the show is interested in how the time travel works. It's just that it's in this way that's kind of doesn't really like, that is creative but doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense. And it sort of like goes back to like, in some ways, even though I know it's not a comedy, it's sort of how I approach something like Doctor Who, where it doesn't have to make sense because, you know, time travel isn't real, at least in the present day, but that like it's a little bit, it still rubs me a little bit the wrong way, where it feels like they're using one set of rules in one situation and a different set of rules in a different situation. And actually I don't think that happens here. It's more just like, that doesn't really make a lot of sense to me, but I'm willing to go with it. But it's that I think like, this is actually part of what's good about the show is the time travel and the creativity about the time travel. So it's not crazy to kind of focus on it a little.
Well, right, exactly. And I mean, Back to the Future is a comedy time travel movie, but within the rules that they establish in Back to the Future, the first one anyway, it all works, you know, or at least I feel like there's three different ways it can go, right? It's like, it actually works if you were to sit down with like straws or whatever, like Bruce Willis says in Looper, and figure it all out. It actually all works. I think maybe Primer might be like that. Or it's like, it doesn't make any sense at all. And it's, you know, it bothers you while you're watching it that it doesn't make any sense at all. Or it could fall into a third sort of middle ground where, like, while you're watching it, it all seems to make sense. But then later when you go back and try to figure it out, it doesn't make sense. And I feel like time travel stories, even if they're comedies, should fall into either of the two categories where it seems to make sense while you're watching it, and it does make sense, or it seems to make sense while you're watching it, but it's not till later that you figure out that it didn't. And when it's bothering me while I'm watching it that it doesn't make sense, I feel like that's a legitimate issue to comment on, even in a comedy.
Okay. I feel like since it's this much of a comedy, since it's such a ridiculous comedy, that it's like, it doesn't even matter. It's the situations they put them in, and the more ridiculous situations that result from the ridiculous situations that they've just messed up. That's the core of what the story is about. And at this point, the time travel is just a device. It's a MacGuffin. It's the papers in Casablanca. All right, that's not my best analogy, but it's just not a thing that's actually it's a device. It's the thing they're writing to make you laugh.
Yeah, and like I said earlier, I mean, I wouldn't necessarily even change it, but I think it's worth talking. It's worth, in a science fiction podcast, it's worth talking about.
Sure, and I love to beat a dead horse. So, am I allowed to beat a dead horse?
Go,
yeah, sure.
Beat it.
I think
I just yelled "beat it" at you, just FYI.
Now you sound like Tiger.
I do.
I'm going to remind myself here of a guy in college. I've sat through an entire. It was some kind of really bad fantasy movie with this group of guys, and at the end, one of them said, "That was a pretty good movie, but in real life, a wizard wouldn't bleed." And so I'm about to sound exactly like that guy. I'll just warn you. But I thought I really thought the time travel did make sense. And Anthony, you're saying like it doesn't make sense. Like when do you create a fork or when don't you? I think within the logic of the story, I think within their rules, I think they were saying you always create a fork whenever you change anything. But sometimes in the fork you create, things are changed much more drastically. So in some of the forks, Josh still goes back in time. So when he comes back to his present, the other him is not there because he's gone back in time with them. But in some forks, he's changed it so drastically that when he goes back to the future, they haven't taken him to the past, so he's still there. The them from the other fork took
I
him
see
to
what
the
you're
past.
saying. I see what you're saying.
That makes more sense because the way I remember the dialogue is he just says, "Oh, in this case there was a fork and that's why there was a duplicate." But what you're saying,
that is what he said. So maybe it's
right.
Reading it.
But your explanation now, which I think is what you're trying to say before, and I didn't understand it. Now I understand what you mean by he didn't go back in time. That makes more sense. Maybe that's what they were going for, and they're like, "We're not going to waste."
Tom. Yeah, I really like that.
Okay, so
and maybe they were like, "We don't need to spend 5 minutes explaining this. It's fine. You'll go with it."
Right.
Wow. All right. So, like, what else do we need to talk about here? So, I guess we can talk about. So at the
wait, what?
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say one last thing with Juice and the duplicates is I thought one joke that they set up that was so perfect. And also I just wanted to say that I loved that there was sort of a pre-stardom Awkwafina just in this really small role, which was great. But also
so
like
funny.
How they're like cleaning up his house and then he keeps being like, no, I have people to do that. And then you find out like, oh, no. He pays them. And in fact, he has no friends in this universe. He just pays people to be his friends. And the way the setup and payoff there is just, so good.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I thought that was so tragic.
Yeah. Well, why don't you talk, Anthony, about Awkwafina? Because I actually, even the post-fame Awkwafina, I wasn't familiar with until.
Sure. I mean, there's still like relative levels of it. I think she initially was known for doing these like music videos, like funny music videos, and was known for that. And as a comedian, and then she was in Crazy Rich Asians and sort of was like the breakout star of Crazy Rich Asians. And so it felt like after that movie, she was kind of everywhere, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, Awkwafina!" And so. I feel like that it seems less likely that she'd be in such a small role in a relatively unknown show. And again, because I'd done so little research before just starting the show, it was just the sort of, oh, wow, okay, like, I didn't expect to see somebody I think of as a celebrity showing up for this tiny thing. And, I mean, there are other kind of fun cameos of semi-famous comedians, but that was the one that really tickled me.
Well, I think this was in 2017, so they probably shot it in 2016. That's way before Crazy Rich Asians came out.
Right.
So.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I wasn't familiar with her, so I actually looked her up, and I guess her big break was this. She's a rapper originally, and she did like a response. So Mickey Avalon has this like song called "My Dick." It was in the second Harold and Kumar movie. That's how I know it. But so she did like a response to that, and I'll just give you some of the lyrics. She says, "It's time that we let the world know, bitch, your vag looks like Janet Reno. Aquafina's a genius, and her vagina is 50 times better than a penis."
Wow.
I'm so glad that I have created the opportunity for Dave to recite the lyrics to my badge on this
That
podcast.
might be the highlight of my day.
It is. I do think it's sort of like similar to Josh Hutcherson in the sense that my badge is like one level of fame, and then Crazy Rich Asians, or in the case of Josh Hutcherson, Hunger Games is sort of then the next level of like, oh, lots of people know who this person is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I guess Josh Hutcherson had never done television before. It's sort of like I have to wonder if he did this show just because he likes the material, more so than because it was like the next logical career move or something.
Is he listed as one of the EPs, one of the executive producers or something, or one of the writers? I thought I caught his name as in a
He's a producer,
role.
not an executive producer.
Producer, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was really good. I really dislike his character in the Hunger Games, and I always have a hard time thinking like, well, I dislike the character, but maybe that means the actor is really good. But he was just so like unmotivated, or he just kind of like let everything kind of happen to him and wanted a lot of things, but never really did anything. And that always really bothered me. But in this, he was, you have to really love the character as well as the actor in this. He does such a great job with making him this person who's like so beset by all these things and really wants things to be right and gets so frustrated with everything. You can really feel it.
Yeah, I thought the casting in this was so good. Like everyone, I can't even imagine anyone else who would be better in any of these roles than the people that have. Like his parents are so good. Oh my god.
Yeah. Sadly, Glenn Headley died.
Oh no.
Yeah,
I think she actually died apparently while they were in production, which is why you don't see her at the end.
Yeah, it's really sad.
Gosh.
Yeah, it's very sad because she was hilarious.
Yeah,
both of them were great. Yeah.
Anthony, were you going to say something else?
Oh, I was going to say that, I do think that you also see some of these kind of teen heartthrob stars like Robert Pattinson from Twilight. Also, like, once they get out of that, there is one of these career paths is like, okay, I'm just going to try to become even more famous. And then the other is, I didn't love that kind of fame, and therefore I'm just going to do things that are kind of interesting and creative. And maybe that's kind of the path that Josh Hutcherson wanted to take.
Well, he was also a fairly serious, like, young actor. He was the son in, The Kids Are All Right. Was that the movie about?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, he was the son, and he was also a child star. I can't think off the top of my head what he was in, but I have memories of him as a young kid in various movies. So he was actually a serious actor before this. Robert Pattinson strikes me as, plucked out of nowhere to play this mopey vampire, and then got sick of the fame and too cool for school, and then started doing all these artsy projects that none of them were very good, let's face it. Now I got Robert Pattinson mad at me, but whatever.
I haven't seen a lot of them. I was definitely not crazy about Maps to the Stars, but I do think he's actually gotten some good reviews where people are like, oh, like, we didn't realize Robert Pattinson is actually a good actor. But again, the only one I've seen, I think, is Maps to the Stars, which I did not like at all.
Actually, let me say about Josh Hutcherson, I listened to an interview where they asked him what his favorite TV show is currently or something, and he said, I think Rick and Morty, he said he's like watched every episode so many times, he can't even remember how many times he's watched them all. So that would add to my theory that this was this project was a personal interest to him.
I would agree with that it's a personal thing.
I feel like it's interesting with Rick and Morty that Rick and Morty has sort of pioneered the gross humor in time travel stories, and also like really, really smart science fiction in that context. And I feel like maybe a show like Future Man wouldn't be as like good in terms of science fiction and in gross in terms of humor without Rick and Morty. Like, because I feel like this is like 75% to me, like as gross and as like smart science fiction as Rick and Morty. It's sort of like, it's in that same vein. It doesn't push things quite so far, except, I mean, maybe some of the full frontal stuff and things like that is maybe like, even surpassing Rick and Morty in some respects. But, I think they're definitely kind of in that same, or it's sort of like following in Rick and Morty's wake in a way.
Yeah, I definitely like Rick and Morty, I think, a little bit more than I like this, because I agree they're sort of doing similar things, and maybe in some ways Rick and Morty kind of like cleared the way for this, but Rick and Morty strikes me as like even more inventive, and also I like the self-contained nature of Rick and Morty, where each episode could be about anything, whereas this one is sort of following one overall plot, which is fine, but as sort of for reasons that I expressed earlier, I wasn't totally crazy about.
Oh, I really liked the fact that this was serialized, actually.
Okay.
I know, Tom, what do you think about this?
The Rick and Morty angle?
Or like, yeah, do you think that, I don't know if you've watched Rick and Morty or not, but like, if you have, you can comment on that. But also just, do you think that, did you like the fact that this told one continuous story, or would you like it more if it was more episodic?
Yeah, I have watched Rick and Morty, and it is hilarious, and I think that's a really good observation you made, that he really likes Rick and Morty, and this is similar in a lot of ways. That makes total sense to me, and no, I like that it's one continuous story. After we just reviewed Dimension 404, which was like, totally new characters and new stories every single time. It was kind of nice to watch something that had a story that kept you going, that where they could really dig into the characters and develop them through a single storyline. I guess you're saying it would have been the same characters, but it would have been like Rick and Morty. It would have been a totally different story every single time. But I thought this was, I liked seeing the timeline of events of like, Wolf starts out as just that stereotypical character from the video game that who's like, headshot, like that guy, and then he evolves from there into like, oh, I actually like cooking a lot, and not only that, I'm really good at it, and not only that, but people just really like me, like wherever he goes, people are just like, you're just the greatest guy ever, and he just gets along with everybody, and then he gets like really into drugs, and he's like, basically like proselytizing drugs and telling everybody how great they are, and then he gets like all messed up, and I don't know, just like that. It's fun to watch that happen through. It's fun to watch. It's almost reminded me a little bit of, one of my favorite books when I was younger was Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. How like Marvin the paranoid android, just like he's one of my favorite characters ever, right? Because he's like 37 times older than the universe itself, because he keeps accidentally getting sent back through time so many times. And he's gone, and his life is like miserable. Like if anybody who should live a long time, it wouldn't be him. It shouldn't be him, because he hates everything and everything is miserable to him. But at the same time, he's had like all these crazy things happen to him. And that's kind of how I see Wolf a little bit. Like he just keeps having all these crazy things happen to him, and he keeps, it's fun to watch him develop. And I actually wanted to see a little bit more of that. I wanted to see him like, maybe abandon the cooking and get into something else that was different even, and be really good at that, or like, become like a classical pianist, or I don't know, something crazy like that. It's just such a fun thing to watch that develop over a series, over a timeline, a series of shows that, yeah, I like the way they did it a lot.
Well, I have to say that I love the episode where they go to the 80s and he goes to the Corey Hart, he goes and plays volleyball, and they do the volleyball scene from Top Gun, including the music. And, wow, was that hilarious. That whole episode, that's also the one where Josh is going through the house, and all the people are going through the house, in Cronish's house. But that episode they make a reference to Silence of the Lambs, Midnight Cowboy, Top Gun. They have Spuds MacKenzie. And the sculpture that everybody keeps knocking into it gotta be a reference to Beetlejuice. So they just hit almost all these great 80s movies.
Did you catch, I didn't catch it until the second time, but the guy says, my cat is named Bunny. And
yes,
he says, I would have hit it somewhere else besides the boiler pot.
Yes. If I had known, the cat is named Bunny, yeah. So that's Fatal Attraction, which is the name of the episode, Operation Fatal Attraction.
Yeah.
Oh, very
so
clever.
it was actually an exceptionally clever episode.
But yeah, I mean, I agree that I think maybe part of the reason that this works better to my mind as a serialized show whereas Rick and Morty works better as an episodic show, because I feel like this show is stronger on the character development than on the inventiveness, and Rick and Morty is stronger on the inventiveness than on the character development. And so they just lend themselves to the different formats.
Sure, that's fair.
Interesting.
I just have a couple random things I want to mention. So I don't know if you guys have watched American Ninja Warrior, but there's this amazing contestant, Jessie Graff, who's won everything. And she's the stunt woman for Tiger in this show.
Oh, wow.
Oh.
And then if you watched it with closed captioning, I just want to say that they have to fire the person and or computer program that did the closed captioning, because it's really bad. Like, one thing that jumped out at me is when they're taking Jerry back to be interrogated, Wolf says, "We have an asset to interrogate," and the closed captioning says, "We have an Aztec to interrogate." I don't know where that came from.
Here's something interesting, because the only time those things ever mess up is when it's live television. They're usually messed up in like live news. But when they send shows to get to they're all done by companies. And there's one specific company, I can't remember the name of it, that does it. They send them a script. So they send them the video and they send them a script. So the fact that they fucked it up is ridiculous. Somebody needs to get fired for that.
All right. We need to start wrapping this up pretty soon. I guess, does anyone have any just other general comments before I talk about the ending? Yeah.
I do. One, getting Corey Hart to come on the show was genius. God bless Corey Hart. And my other thing is, did anybody else catch the fact that she had the number 45 scarred on her arm?
No.
Nope.
On her, am I making this up? I don't know. She has the number 45. It's a scar on her arm, like a raised scar. I couldn't get my eyes off of it. And I'm like, is this a reference to a certain president? Maybe? I don't know. I was just so prominent. I can't believe it. Nobody else saw that.
Well, I mean, because their resistance movement is called the Resistance, and she has a tattoo that seems to say resistance or something. You can't see all of it.
Yeah, on her chest. It says resistance.
I don't know. Maybe they're tying it in with that idea in contemporary culture. I don't know.
Although it also seems like they're trying to set up more plot for her too, because there's the whole thing about her not being affected by the gas. So it seems like there's some backstory that's probably going to be explored in later seasons.
See, I thought the implication, and like I said, none of us have watched season 2, so this probably gets answered, I would imagine, pretty quickly. But I thought the implication was that Tiger is actually a biotic or something when she's not affected by the gas.
Oh.
Right,
Yeah,
that's what I thought, but it was never, it was just that one scene and then not followed up on in the current season. So it seems like I think probably she's a biotic, maybe there's something else going on.
Right.
Yeah, so probably we won't spend too much time speculating about season 2 because we can just go watch it right away. It's kind of
we could just look really dumb.
But see, what we should do is we should have actually watched it, and then we could just come up with brilliant predictions that are all like uncannily accurate.
Maybe someone has done that and they're just not admitting it.
But yeah, so I don't know. We're out of time. So why don't we start wrapping this up? So, and like we could seriously, I feel like we could do a 3-hour podcast just talking about jokes that worked in this show.
Yeah. God, yeah. Okay,
there's one I have to mention. Because it's like, it's all the way, the setup for it is all the way through the show, and it's in episode 11 that it finally pays off. He keeps saying, "You guys don't know this? This is like time travel 101. He like says that like 10 times throughout the series. He does. And then at one point, he does something wrong, and Tiger says to him, "That is time travel 101, even though I've never been to your stupid made-up time travel college."
Wait, all right, now I got to bring up one last joke that I thought was hilarious. It's in the last episode where she's fighting with the woman about the setting the bomb off, and she doesn't want to kill the little girl when they're in the lobby of the building. And the woman's name is Dingo. And she tries to take the locket with a picture of baby Cronish, and she says, "No, Dingo, do not take my baby."
I missed that. I missed that. Watching it twice.
That is
such
good.
a quick joke that it's like, oh my god. And that's talk about a setup, because they had to set that up from a while ago, that there was somebody
Right.
named Dingo and bring her back. It was like,
Right.
wow, that's a long game.
Yeah, so wow. So even probably I need to watch this again to pick up some jokes I missed even after watching it twice. But yeah, like it's really funny. Like I said, the humor is not for everyone, but if it's your sort of humor, and if you're, if you like science fiction, this is like, because there aren't very many, there's a lack of comedic science fiction, and then there's a lack of comedic science fiction that's really funny.
Yeah.
And this is that. So if you like particularly Tom and me, if you like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy and stuff, and you're just always on the hunt for more humorous science fiction, definitely check this show out.
Yes.
Agreed.
All right. Anyone have any final thoughts? Anthony, final thought?
I don't have a joke that I wanted to shout out, but I do want to just say that as much as we were talking about all the amazing cast, and they really are all very good, I think Derek Wilson as Wolf is probably the MVP. Just like the complete commitment and the way he does that ridiculous voice for the entire season is just so impressive, and just completely commits to this insane character. And less flashy, I also really liked Keith David, and I thought that like he was the reason why like there's like Cronus, when he has his death scene at the end, it actually is kind of sad, and it's like,
totally,
because he really sells it. Like that there's this sort of like dignity to his performance that I just and I mean he's great throughout the whole thing, but especially that death scene I thought was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was. I agree, he was great. Have you guys seen Bubba Hotep?
No, I've never
I have,
seen it.
yeah.
He's
a great movie.
He's great in that too.
Yeah, and I was really impressed by the performances from a lot of these actors that I mean, maybe they're in stuff that I haven't watched, but I wasn't super familiar with some of these actors, and I thought, like I said, everyone in this I thought was great. Andrea, final thought.
Just I didn't have any nitpicks with this at all. Usually the funny part of doing one of these things is if we watch something terrible and just there's always fun in making fun of something that's really bad. I had nothing bad to say about this. I spent 13 episodes laughing my ass off out loud, which is really hard to do because, as you know, I'm dead and hollow inside.
Yeah,
so,
you're like Tiger, basically.
I am like Tiger, exactly that. So she actually even had a tattoo that was like mine. I was like, hey. What's going on? The fact that it had me.
It's like you and James Cameron just both got put in this show without your permission.
That's right. I'm suing. You'll be hearing from my lawyers. The fact that I had nothing bad to say about this, and that I legitimately laughed out loud at throughout every episode is just. I'm so glad you asked me to do this. I'm so glad I watched this because it was a great experience, really funny. Anybody, go watch this. Go watch the show. There, I said.
Yeah, and if you listen to our Dimension 404 panel, you know that Andrea has high standards for humor and doesn't necessarily love everything that she watches.
I necessarily, like, not 9 times out of 10, I don't like it. But no, this was fantastic. Totally right in my wheelhouse.
All right, Tom, final thought.
Yeah, I loved it. I definitely thought there were a couple episodes here or there that were weaker than others, but they were few and far between, and I thought that, a couple of the episodes were downright transcendent, like just where I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe how they just seem to be making it one better and one better with everything they do. And yeah, love the characters, love the casting and the acting and the direction and the writing. I thought everything was really good in this, and I'll definitely watch the next season for sure.
Yeah, so everyone, if you're listening to this, definitely watch season 1 of the show, and then even if you've heard all this, you can immediately go and start watching season 2, which is in progress and totally unspoiled by us anyway. And I'm probably going to go watch season 2 right now. So let's wrap things up there. So we've been speaking with Anthony Ha, Andrea Kail, and Tom Gerencer. So thanks everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
And that was our panel. So big thanks again to Anthony Ha, Andrea Kail, and Tom Gerencer for joining us on the show. And remember that Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is made possible thanks to support from listeners like you. So if you enjoyed the show and want it to continue, please sign up to give us $1 or $2 per episode over at patreon.com/geeks. And if you'd rather make a one-time contribution, you can do that via check or PayPal over at geeksguideshow.com/crowdfunding. And I want to give a special thank you to Jesse Lerma, who just made a one-time contribution to the show via PayPal. So big thanks again to everyone who's contributed. We really appreciate it. All right, so that was our show. So thanks everyone for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of Wired.com. For more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your host, visit davidbarrkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by yours truly, Jack Kincaid. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.